Hello and welcome. Thank you everyone for joining us today for EarthEcho's STEMExplore Virtual Career Connections. My name is Casey, Programs Manager at EarthEcho International. We're so excited to have everyone join us this afternoon and can't wait to talk to our STEMexplore mentor today. So let's go ahead and get started with STEMexplore Virtual Career Connection featuring Nia Morales. She's a social scientist and human dimension specialist at Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission in Gainesville, Florida. We are so excited to have students from all over the globe joining us today as we learn about exciting and sustainable careers in science, technology, engineering, and math. This live event is part of STEMexplore, EarthEcho's program that brings inspiration to life by telling stories of dynamic female professionals in STEM careers during live virtual career connections. We want to thank our founding sponsor, United Technologies, for all of their support of women in STEM. And here at EarthEcho, we believe that youth have the power to change the planet. Please visit www.earthecho.org to learn more about our programs. You can also access resources like STEMexplore's career profile videos, as well as tune in for upcoming events just like this one you are tuning in live today. I'd like to recognize and thank STEMexplore's partner sites across the country and recognize those that are joining us live today. So let's go ahead and get a hello from our friends at FAU Pine Jog Environmental, located in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hello, Pine Jog. How is everyone? Good. It's so wonderful to see you today. How's the weather over there on the east coast of Florida? Hot. It does not feel like the end of October, does it?
No.
No, I am also in Florida. I'm across the state from you. So I'm on the west coast of Florida and it is hot. For those of you in a little bit of cooler climate, consider yourself lucky to have a little touch of fall. We're definitely craving that here in Florida. Now, we also have other sites joining us today, tuning in for our live stream in Key Largo, Florida, West Palm, Florida, and in Honolulu, Hawaii. So welcome to everyone who is tuning in. And if you are watching one of our live streams, just a reminder that you can send in questions for our STEM expert via chat. And we will break throughout today's presentation to see if you have any questions for our expert, Nia. Feel free to start typing in questions in that chat space on YouTube, or if you're live in this Zoom feed. We'll be sure to answer those as we go along. So without further ado, why don't we go ahead and get things started? I want to welcome our special guest for today's EarthEcho STEMexplore Virtual Career Connection, Nia Morales. Hi, Nia, how are you today?
Hi, Casey. I'm doing well. Hi, everybody out there.
It's so wonderful to have you here, Nia. We're so excited. So before we get started, I'd like to introduce you to everyone tuning in out there. Nia Morales is a social scientist with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. She leads the Center for Conservation Social Science Research, which consists of a group of researchers who design studies to better understand how humans interact with the environment. Nia got her PhD in human dimensions from the Wildlife Ecology and Conservation Department at the University of Florida, where she conducted her dissertation research on understanding the barriers and opportunities to minorities pursuing conservation career. She also has a master's degree in environmental education from Florida Atlantic University and a bachelor's degree in wildlife ecology and conservation from the University of Florida. In her spare time, Nia is an avid equestrian and competes in horse shows. She has lots of pets. She has two dogs, two cats, one horse, and a bunch of fish. She loves to travel with her husband, Carlos, and enjoys all kinds of outdoor recreation, from fishing and scuba diving to hiking and camping. Nia, we are so excited to have you here joining us today. So to get started, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do?
Sure. So I work for Florida Fish and Wildlife, like Casey said, and that's a state wildlife agency. So basically, as a state wildlife agency, we're in charge with making sure that all of the wildlife and fish populations are healthy in Florida. So I lead the Center for Conservation Social Science. So I actually study people and not animals. But I study how people interact with wildlife and how we can better work with biologists and managers so that we can understand the public and stakeholders, what they do, their behaviors, their opinions, to help manage Florida's wildlife and natural resources. So I wasn't originally interested in people. I started off interested in wildlife, but I actually worked at Pine Jog, so that's where I got my master's degree. And I worked at a nature center in Gainesville, Florida, and I really got into environmental education. And that's how I learned that I really love the people side of everything.
So Nia, can you maybe explain to some of the folks out there what exactly is environmental education? I'm familiar with it, but I'm not sure everybody out there knows exactly what that means.
Sure. So environmental education is basically a form of non-formal education. So, you go to school during the day and you study your different, I guess, subject matter. Environmental education basically involves teaching about the environment incorporated into that, and then a lot of field stuff. And then human dimensions, which is what I do with FWC, is working with understanding how people interact with nature so that we can better predict and help people to have more environmentally friendly behaviors.
Excellent. So another thing I just thought of is FWC. You're in Florida. I'm in Florida. Our partners at Pine Jog are in Florida. But for those tuning in, can you just kind of say again what FWC stands for and what exactly is that organization does?
Sure. So FWC is the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. So I guess technically it's FFWCC, but we shorten it because that's too long to say. But pretty much every state has a wildlife agency that's a government agency, and they're in charge with making sure that the wildlife and fish populations are healthy. So what's really cool is that HD and conservation social science, which is what I do, is a pretty new field and has only recently had job opportunities. So now we're understanding that pretty much people are kind of the biggest challenge to wildlife. The wildlife and fish would be perfectly fine on their own. And it's when people get in the mix that problems can start to happen. So now a lot of state agencies are hiring people like me to better understand how people interact with wildlife.
Excellent. Okay. So, and every state has one of these agencies. Obviously, we have even agencies on even a higher level as well, like the Environmental Protection Agency. So I know that you said your career, the social science aspect, the human dimension aspect of this work is fairly new. But for example, what other jobs could you find? And we've got a really nice graph here to show maybe some careers that we could find, say, with a federal agency such as the Environmental Protection Agency, which is the example we have here on this slide. But what kind of careers would people possibly have working at FWC, and what would those jobs maybe look like, even in terms of what kind of paycheck would you take home?
Sure. So FWC and even the federal government. So there's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There's the Environmental Protection Agency. There's the Bureau of Land Management. So there's lots of different state and federal agencies that are in charge with environmental issues. So you can be everything from a biologist in the field or a lab technician or an environmental scientist. So there's a whole broad range of things that you can do. And we even have law enforcement agents, so you can be a wildlife cop, essentially, or like a ranger. State agencies typically pay a little bit less than the federal agencies, but you can make a pretty decent salary in any of these. And most of the folks who work with state or federal agencies have a master's degree. So I have a PhD, so I kept going. So you don't need a PhD to work with a state or federal agency, but most of them do want a master's degree.
So there's really a lot of opportunities when you're talking about these state agencies like FWC, everything from managing projects to actually doing research and scientific work to environmental education, and then all the way up to also talking about some of the work that you do as well. So where would somebody go, a student, for example, if they were really interested in trying to find a career, because it just from this list, there's a lot there. Where are some good places for them to kind of look around and see where some job opportunities might be?
So there's a few websites you can check out. USA Jobs is a website for the federal government, and that includes all the federal agencies. So that's everything from US Fish and Wildlife Service, I think even to NASA. So it's pretty much everything. There's a really neat job board that Texas A&M, which is a university in Texas, they manage. It's pretty much the most comprehensive wildlife job board that I've seen, and it's been around for years. And most people who are in environmental science and wildlife will look through that bulletin for jobs. And then if you're interested in a job with Florida's agencies, and I forgot to mention too, we have FWC is our wildlife agency, and we have the Department of Environmental Protection, which is another agency in Florida, and they run the state parks. But both of those types of jobs you can get by looking at the People First website, which is the other one that's here on this slide.
All right, awesome. Well, we have kind of some groundwork laid of who you are and a little bit about what you do and a little bit more about those environmental agencies. So I want to open it up for some questions from our friends at FAU Pine Jog. Now, Louisa, maybe before they ask you a question, could you maybe tell them your experience of being at FAU Pine Jog Environmental?
My experience.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant for Nia.
Oh.
Okay, of course. I would love to hear that from Nia.
Yeah, so I was actually a graduate student there pretty much when that building that you're sitting in was built. So that was around 2008, I think. I did my master's there, and I lived at Pine Jog. So I lived back in the 150 acres towards the back in a little house. And so I helped to design and run education programs throughout Palm Beach County and on Pine Jog's property. And I helped them maintain the trails and do all kinds of really cool projects.
That's awesome. All right, so let's open it up to the students at FAU Pine Jog. What questions do you have for Nia today?
Come over here so you can speak louder here, okay?
I think you already answered this, but what inspired you to be one? And to be one of those things that you are right now?
So what inspired you to go into your career? Great question.
That's a good question. And I have a slide about that later, but basically it boils down to TV. I was inspired by lots of Saturday morning TV shows that were about nature and wildlife.
How many of you like to watch TV shows about nature or anything on the internet? I know I did when I was your age. I still do. Do we have another question out there at FAU Pine Jog?
Who has another question? You have another one? Okay, come over here while everybody else has some time to think about your question.
When you were showing the chart, it had like the money side. Is that how much money you get or no?
Let's go back to that while you answer that question, Nia.
How much money do you get to?
How much money do I get? So, in this chart, so I make $65,000 a year, which is actually pretty good. I didn't start off making that much, but now I run a center, so I'm the boss. So I make a little bit more than the people that I oversee. So that's kind of cool because I got a promotion.
Perfect. Thank you for that. All right, Nia, so let's talk a little bit more about that inspiration and what inspired you to go into the career that you are in. So maybe let's talk a little bit more about those TV shows.
Yeah, so my family is not really into wildlife and nature. That's a picture of me as a baby, just because I thought you might want a cute picture of me. So I lived in cities pretty much my whole life, and I didn't really do a lot of hiking or camping or fishing or anything. My family does not really do the outdoor stuff. We go to the beach, that's about it. But every Saturday morning, there used to be programs that would come on TV. We didn't have YouTube, and we didn't have TV on demand, so you couldn't record anything, so you had to be there. And there were probably 4 or 5 hours worth of cartoons and all kinds of things, but there are also wildlife programs. And so these pictures are pictures of the screens for the title screens for the shows that were my favorite when I was growing up. And I my mom was pretty much a single mom for a lot of the time. So I was what they call a latchkey kid. So that means that I went to lots of after school programs. So I spent a long time at after school programs. And anytime I was in one of those, I was always looking in encyclopedias and nature books and that kind of thing, because I just really loved everything having to do with nature and wildlife.
All right, Nia, can you tell us kind of a little bit more about your career path? For example, how did you know that you wanted to go into environmental work and work with wildlife? So where did you start off going to school?
So I started off at a small college called Skidmore College, which was in upstate New York. I ended up transferring out of there. They had an it's an environmental science program, and I was there for a year, but it didn't really gel with me, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So then I transferred back to a community college called Santa Fe College, and there I got what's called an associate's degree, which is a 2-year degree. And once I got that, I was able to transfer to the University of Florida, where they had a wildlife ecology program. And so in the wildlife ecology program, it's super cool because you get to learn about all kinds of wildlife and fish ecology issues. And I realized that I really wanted to have some kind of career, but I didn't really know what kind of careers were available. I only knew about wildlife biologists. And it wasn't until I got a job at a nature center that I decided, oh my gosh, I really like this people side of things. So I got a job at Morningside Nature Center, which is a small park in Gainesville, Florida, where I did a job very similar to what I did at Pine Jog. And I led field trips and I did summer camp programs. And that led me to wanting to get my master's degree. So I did that at FAU Pine Jog. And then after that, because I guess that amount of school wasn't enough for me, I decided to go back and get my PhD in human dimensions, which was more of the sciencey side of environmental education. So I wanted to learn more about research. And that's what led me to FWC. But throughout this whole process, I was kind of not sure of all the careers that were available. And every new place I went, I learned more things about what kind of jobs there were, and it opened up new doors. So I was just open to things.
Awesome. Now, Nia, I noticed that you kind of hover in the state of Florida. So was your family close by when you started working or when you started going to school, excuse me, did you leave home? Was your family in Florida and you went to Skidmore and then you came back to Florida, or?
Yeah, so most of my mom's side of the family lives in South Florida.
Okay.
Like I mentioned before, my mom was mostly a single mom. My dad actually lived in New York. But I don't talk to him too much. He's a good guy, but we don't have a really close relationship. And so when I went to New York, I actually ended up, part of the reason I wanted to come back was because all of my family was in Florida. And so I wanted to stay close to them. So my mom didn't have a lot of money. And so I had to pay my way through everything. And I had a lot of summer jobs and even working through the regular semesters so that I could help with things with my mom as well. So I wanted to be close because we just didn't have a lot of resources.
All right, that's good. And that brings up a good point because you went to a lot of school and you have the ultimate degree, you have a PhD. So did you find that it was tough going to school? Did you have funds set aside for that? How did you pay your way through college?
I did not have any money set aside for any of that. I don't even think I had a savings account until I had a real job. So most I did for my undergrad, I took out student loans, which I'm still paying to this day. But all of my graduate school, so FAU and my PhD, was paid through scholarships, assistantships, and fellowships. So I worked my butt off in school to get good grades, and I actually was able to have other people pay me to go to graduate school, which is probably the best thing to do.
That is incredible. And that's super good advice for any students that are tuning in, is trying to find any local resources, trying to be creative with your college career path. If you don't have ways to put yourself through college, if your family doesn't have the means to put you through college, staying close to home always a good idea, especially those community colleges as well, where some of the tuition is a little bit lower than big universities. So finding different ways, looking at financial aid and looking at possible grants or fellowships that you can be part of, that you might fit the mold and go ahead and apply for that. So always get creative and don't be afraid to put yourself out there and to ask for help when you are putting yourself through school, because it can be really difficult. So you went through all this school, and then you decided to go into environmental education. So can you talk a little bit more about that and how that led you into your work at FWC?
Sure. So after I graduated from Pine Jog, and I actually was working with the a county, Marion County, which is near Ocala, Florida, which is a little bit south of here. And so when I was there, I was doing public outreach for water conservation. And that job allowed me to go out into the public and talk about water conservation to different groups. And it was when I was at that job that I realized that education, environmental education, wasn't enough, that I needed to understand how to research human behavior. Because there are reasons that people do things that I didn't understand. And so I thought that getting a PhD in human dimensions would help me better understand why people do the things they do. What makes somebody decide to recycle or not recycle? What makes somebody decide to hunt or fish or not hunt and fish? So when I went back to school, those gave me the tools to understand how to do research projects. And after I got my PhD, I was hired with FWC, and I was actually their very first human dimensions scientist. So they didn't even have social science before I was hired. They realized that they weren't reaching out to people as well as they should to understand them. So I actually got the opportunity to be their first researcher.
Wow, that's incredible. So how many other social scientists are on staff with FWC now?
Well, now that we have a center, there are 4 of us.
Wow, that's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So here at EarthEcho, we believe that we can act now for a sustainable future. So obviously the things that you're doing, you're looking at, you're going a step further of not only trying to inspire change, but you're trying to figure out what makes people tick, what would make someone change or make the decision that they would possibly go to, maybe to recycle or, you know, to give to a foundation that maybe works towards a sustainable future. So can you elaborate a little bit more about that, about how your job works with your community and how you can kind of look into the future and contribute to sustainability?
Sure. So one of the mission of FWC is to preserve and conserve wildlife for the benefit of Florida's people, right? So fish and wildlife and natural resources are here for everybody. So the way that I help to contribute to a sustainable future is that pretty much every environmental issue is traced back to people in some way. So my work with human dimensions and social science helps FWC understand why people do what they do, and how we can influence people to change their behaviors so we can sustain and conserve fish and wildlife for the whole state. So I'm hoping that I make a contribution by helping our biologists understand human behavior so we can influence people to do the right thing for nature.
That is so interesting. So can you give us a really concrete example of something that you've been working on and ways that you're studying people and how they come to the decisions that they make?
Sure. So I did a study a couple years ago where we looked at how conservation messages influence what people do. So we put on an experiment, and we had very positive messages that were things like, you can help save the environment by doing simple things. And then we had very negative messages that said, you know, there's nothing you can do and everything's bad. And we tested those by having people watch videos that had the positive message and the negative message. And we found out that people respond better and are willing to donate more money and time to agencies that had positive messages instead of agencies that had negative messages. So now we understand that if we if we do our outreach and education in a positive way, that it makes people more willing to actually behave in a good and environmentally positive way instead of doom and gloom. Doom and gloom doesn't work.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's head back over to everyone tuning in out there to see if we have any questions. So let's go to our interactive site at FAU Pine Jog Environmental Center. What questions do you have for Nia?
One by one, and you guys can get closer, okay? Come over here.
What's your favorite part about your job?
Ooh, what's your
Say it again.
favorite part about your job?
I think my favorite part about my job is that I get to travel all over Florida and meet lots of different people. So 2 weeks ago, I got to go to the Keys. I was in Marathon, Florida, and I got to learn about coral restoration, so how we're saving the coral reefs in Florida. And I travel from South Florida to the Panhandle, all over the place, and I get to meet lots of different people and learn about lots of different issues.
Excellent.
Great question. Okay, come over here.
How many years have you been in school?
Ooh, how many years did you go to school?
Many, many years. Let's see. So it's 4 years for a bachelor's degree, 2 years for a master's degree, so that's 6, and then 4 more years for a PhD, so that's 10. So I spent 10 years in college, on top of all the high school and middle school and elementary school. That's a long time.
So let's see, how long have some of you been in school right now? So 3 years. Do you want to keep going? So how many more years do you have before you graduate from high school?
10, 12, 11.
Okay, do you want to add 10 more years onto that? You might, you never know. Sometimes school can be really fun. If you like what you're learning about, it can be really, really fun. Let's take another question.
What is the hardest part of your job?
Ooh, what is the hardest part of your job?
Question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the hardest part of my job is that even though I study how to change behavior, that doesn't mean that people will change their behavior. So there are a lot of situations where we learn about an environmental issue and we learn about what causes it, but for some reason or another, people are unwilling to change what they do to help prevent or make the thing better. So I think that's probably the most frustrating thing that I've come across, is when people are reluctant to change.
That's really interesting. So can anybody at FAU Pine Jog think of, if we think about the environment and we want the environment to be healthy, what is something good that we want to do for the environment that people can do to help? Can anybody give us an example?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Take a trash bag and put all the trash that you see on the beach, put it in the plastic bag.
That is wonderful. So go and maybe do a beach cleanup, a coastal cleanup, or no matter where you live, you can clean up your neighborhood or any place by a river or a stream. That is excellent. Do you think sometimes it's hard to get people to do that?
Yes.
Yeah, it is sometimes. So we need to be positive about it, right? And people need to learn why it's good to do that. That's excellent. All right, let's take another question at Pine Jog. I know there are lots out there. This is great.
Yeah, you ask her. Here's the camera.
Do you love doing your job?
Do you love doing your job?
I do love doing my job. I think it's very unique. I get to be inside the office and sometimes out of the office, so every day is a little bit different, which I think is really cool.
That's awesome. Nia, with your work, do you do a lot of observations? Do you just go somewhere and sit back and watch people? Is that part of your work sometimes?
I don't think that's part of my work, but I find that I do that everywhere I go. I'm always watching people and trying to understand what they're doing, and I think that's just the social scientist in me.
That's amazing. All right, FAU Pine Jog, let's take another question.
In the white shirt in the back.
Was this your future when you were a kid?
Oh, did you see this being your future when you were a kid?
Not at all. I had never heard of environmental education. I had never heard of social science. When I was, I'd say, in 6th grade, the only thing I knew about was a park ranger and a dolphin trainer. So I knew about marine biology and I knew about wildlife or park rangers. So I had no idea.
That brings up a really good point, Nia, because when we were younger, before the internet, if you all can believe the internet, there was a time where it didn't exist. For us to figure out what all these jobs were, or for to even talk to somebody like Nia, the opportunities we had to find out what was out there was TV. And like Nia said, we could not record things. We had to actually be there and sit down. We had to look at a guide for the TV called the TV Guide to see when, say, Jack Hanna was on. Jack Hanna was a really big show when we were younger. And some of you may have heard of Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, but that's still before your time. But other people like Jeff Corwin, he still has a show now. So we would sit and we would watch these TV shows, and that's how we would learn about what's out there. And then the other way we would learn, like Nia said, when she went to some of her after school programs, she would pick up encyclopedias or pick up different books. And Nia, I think I would agree with you. I think I knew that park rangers existed and dolphin trainers. And that was kind of my understanding of working with wildlife. And I think, Nia, you said it, that you just started going to school and started to figure out what was out there, and you tried different things. And then you realized you really like the human aspect. You like studying people and figuring out what makes them tick to make their decisions.
Yep, exactly.
Great question. All right, Pine Jog, let's take another question.
How many years have you been doing your job for?
Oh.
How many years have you been doing your job?
So I have been with FWC for 4 years. So not too long.
Can I ask a question really quick? I'm sorry, but I have to ask a question.
Oh, please do.
When did you decide switching from the animal passion to human? Like, what was that? What inspired you, or was a specific?
Oh, that's a good question, because it wasn't what inspired me. It's what I realized I did not like. So I had to take classes that were called field classes, where you go out and you have to learn different techniques about how to trap wild animals or measure them. And so we had to get dirty and gross and hot and stinky. And I realized that I did not like getting dirty and gross and hot and stinky for months at a time. So I wanted a job where I can do a little bit of that, but also be in an office. And so I decided that wildlife ecology, being a field biologist, was not for me.
That brings up a really good point about exploring what it is that you like, even if you like to be outside. Like, say you like to go fishing. There's definitely a job for you where you, believe it or not, would get paid to go fishing. And I know that FWC works very closely with fisheries and studying that area. And like you said, there's even police that work with FWC, law enforcement. So you can always find these different niches of what you like to do. And there's definitely, I'll bet you that there's a job out there for you. All right, let's take another question.
How did you find your job out of all the jobs that are in Florida?
Oh, how did you find your job out of all the jobs that were in Florida? That's a great question too.
That's a very good question. So before we talked about different websites that you can find jobs on, but this job I did not find on a website. So as you go through school and your career and all the opportunities you have, you meet lots of people. And sometimes those people decide that you're a person that they really want to help support. So I was told about this job from somebody who met me at a conference. And a conference is where you go and you talk about your science, your research. And she told me that FWC was going to be hiring their first social scientists. And she thought that I would be really good for the job and that I should apply. So that's how I found out about this job.
That's awesome. And I know networking is a really big thing. So all about the people you know and meet, and just keeping those people in the back of your head. And that way you can reach out and say hello to them, ask if they have any advice, or maybe they might come up to you and say, hey, I know of a job that will fit exactly what it is that you're doing. And here's a look again at those websites that Nia pointed out for us. One of them is called USA Jobs, and that kind of searches great resource here in the state of Florida. And then, like she mentioned, the Texas A&M Job Board, they have all kinds of jobs that work in the environment and in conservation, not only in Texas, even though it's Texas A&M, but all over the nation. So you can see there some of those first listings are in the state of California. So take a look at some of those resources and websites if you have an interest. And even if you know you like doing working with wildlife, or you think you want to work outdoors, or you really like the environment and you want to do good for it, go to that website and just see what jobs are out there. And I bet it would surprise you. There's probably jobs out there that you didn't realize that existed. All right, Pine Jog, let's head over to you for another question. I think we have a few more hands up, so we'll try and get as many in as we can.
What kind of places have you visited?
Ooh, great question. What kind of places have you visited?
So I've been all over the place, and some of the places that I visit are for vacations because I like to do naturey things on vacation. This summer I went to Yellowstone National Park, which is in Wyoming, and that was the first time I'd ever seen that. I like to scuba dive, so I've been all around the world scuba diving. I've been to Australia, I've been to Japan, I've been to Mexico. I think those are the places, and Florida for scuba diving. So I've been all over. I love to travel.
And you said you travel all over Florida for work, correct?
Yes. I've been to pretty much the whole state.
That's awesome.
It's a lot
Florida's
of driving.
A great state, and it's really big, but it's a great state. All right, Pine Jog, let's take another question.
What was your childhood like?
Oh.
It was nice. So, like I said before, I lived in a lot of cities. So I was born in Massachusetts, but I bounced around a little bit and lived in Buffalo, New York, and also for a little bit in Saratoga Springs, New York. But most of my life I've lived in Florida. I lived in a place called Hollywood, Florida, which is in South Florida. And I lived with my extended family. So I used to live in a house with my grandmother, my sister, my mom, and my uncle. And so we had a big family, and I have lots of cousins, and we get together all the time. Yeah.
All right, let's take another question.
Was life tough for you or hard?
Say that again.
Was life tough?
Oh, was like growing up, was it tough for you?
I think when you're a kid, you sometimes don't realize when things are tough because you're just a kid. So I know that my mom struggled a lot with money, and we didn't have very much money. And so she was raising 2 kids on her own. So we didn't have a lot of stuff, but I think we had a big family. And so we were always together with my family. So I didn't really notice that we didn't have a lot of stuff. And as I grew up, I think money is pretty much the hardest thing. But if you have a good connection with families and friends, then it doesn't seem so hard. So now things are pretty good. So I like it.
Awesome. All right, Pine Jog, I think we have time for 2 more questions.
Okay, 2 more. So I'm going to have you and you can go ahead.
Okay. How old are you?
How old are you?
Oh, hi. Let's see. How old am I? I'm 36.
I have 2 questions.
Speak up a little bit so she can hear you, okay?
What's your first question?
Wait.
I have a question for you. Are you having fun?
Yeah.
Okay, good, good. Do you remember your question?
Your question now? Okay.
At your job, do you take breaks?
Do you take breaks at your job? That's a really good question.
Yeah, I take a lot of breaks. So I sit in front of a computer for a long time, most of the days. So sometimes I like to go out. What's really cool is where my office is, there's a little bit of forest in front of it. So a lot of us from the office will get out every once in a while and we'll walk around, because if not, you'll go crazy sitting in front of a computer all day long.
You say you have another question?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, you forgot. Okay, it's okay.
Oh, that's okay.
And we have the last one. One more.
Yep,
One more.
perfect.
And that one.
Out of all the places that you've been, which one was your favorite?
That's a good question. So I think out of all the places I've visited, Hawaii was my favorite. So shout out to you people who are on from Hawaii, because I eventually want to live there one day.
I will agree. Hawaii is a pretty special place. All right. Well, great questions, everyone. Those were awesome. So, Nia, would you have any last words of advice for everybody tuning in today?
Sure. So I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, and that's okay. I realized as an adult that you don't have to know what you want. If there's a general area that you like, you'll find opportunities. And it's important that you be your own advocate. And an advocate is somebody who stands up for somebody. So sometimes in life, you may be the only one who thinks the way that you think, and it's okay. And so you should really be confident in yourself, because if you're confident in yourself, people can see that. And take every opportunity that you can and run with it.
That is awesome. Really good words of wisdom from Nia. Thank you so much. That is great words of advice. So thank you to everyone for tuning in, and a big thank you to our STEMExplore mentor, Nia Morales, for joining us today. You can keep up and keep in touch with Nia, and by following her, you can follow FWC on their social media channels, check out their website. Nia was nice enough to provide her email address so you could reach out to her. So keep watching her adventures, because she's doing some really great stuff. Now, I want to thank our STEMExplore partner sites all over the nation. And of course, I want to thank FAU Pine Jog Environmental for tuning in live today. You guys had such amazing questions. Good job. I hope you had a great time, because I had fun with you. Now, EarthEcho has some exciting opportunities coming up. STEMExplore will continue tomorrow as we feature women in STEM careers with our virtual career connections. We're going to start early tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern, but we have several live events slated for this month and on into November and even into December. So again, visit www.earthecho.org to see our entire lineup of STEMExplore virtual career connections. And of course, be sure to register. If you register, you can interact with our STEMExplore mentor live. Now, this virtual career connection, be sure to stay tuned with EarthEcho on our social media channels and, of course, our website. And you can learn all about the other programming that EarthEcho has to offer right there on earthecho.org. Thank you again to our wonderful STEMExplore mentor, Nia Morales, and a special thank you to United Technologies for the tremendous support of this program. On behalf of EarthEcho International, thank you for joining us today, and keep exploring.